was always a good day in the fields when he would show up. The boss man was not always present in the fields, but there would be certain days when he would come and he would check on his workers. He would check on the conditions of his fields and the crops. Sometimes he would travel on business and other times he would be local. And this was a day that he would come and spend time among his workers. The interesting thing about this boss was that he had the kind of demeanor that you looked forward to, kind of rare amongst bosses of the fields. A fair man, a hard man, but also a kind man, known for his speech. And when he would come into the fields, he would say, "The Lord bless you." And the workers would cry out in response, "And also you." And on this particular day, as the boss was walking through the fields, he took notice of someone he had not seen before. It was common for the poor to gather around the workers to pick amongst the sheaves. And so this one particular individual caught his attention, and so he asked and inquired, "Who is this one who has come to gather among the sheaves?" And the workers said, "This is the widow Ruth. And she has come from Moab with her mother-in-law, who is also a widow, Naomi." And so Boaz, the boss, made sure that there was special instruction given to make provision for her, because he noticed her, took account of her circumstances, and wanted to ensure that they would be well taken care of. He's an honorable man. And this went on for some time, and it came time for harvest, and so he had been working with his workers, and he came to the threshing floor at night, and it was just one of those occasions, the stars were out, and he decided, this is a good spot to just sleep for the night. Unbeknownst to him, there was someone who snuggled up right next to him under his blanket. That was an unusual occurrence for this boss. In fact, it most likely had never happened before. And there was this young widow who had offered herself to him and put herself in a very vulnerable place. Could you imagine what was spinning in his mind at that moment of a quiet, dark setting with a vulnerable young woman right by his side and no one around? He was an honorable man. He was a fair man and a kind man. And so he said, "Do not fear. Do not be afraid." He treated her with honor. And he recognized her gesture for what it was. It was a request for covering, a request for care and compassion and provision. And so he made every effort he could to follow through with compassion. The next day, he went to the gate where deals were made amongst the city elders. And he knew that he did not have the first right of redemption for this young widow because there was a connection to the family. Naomi's family there was a connection there, but there was a closer kinsman. And so there was some uncertainty about what's going to happen, and this other man has every right to select this young widow for himself. And yet, that relative felt like the cost was too great to care for her, plus his own family members. And so it goes that Boaz was able to redeem Ruth. It's a beautiful picture of the redemption love of God that stands apart in a culture that at that time in Israel's history, the Bible says that everyone did what was right in their own eyes. It was a very selfish time, a might makes right kind of culture. Definitely a culture of quid pro quo, where I will help you so long as you help me. And yet, this man lived in such a countercultural way that it stands through the test of time of a theological picture of the love of God for us, reflected perfectly in the person of Jesus Christ, and sets the standard for every Christian. Would you think that we live in a dark culture? Would you say that we live in a culture that is a what have you done for me lately kind of mindset? That quid pro quo still can be the predominant perspective of if you rub my back or you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. And it still stands apart in our culture when there are men and women who live in a selfless, kind, compassionate manner, in a manner that looks like Jesus. And it's exactly what we want to be. Boaz and Ruth, they stand apart as an example of a couple who demonstrated a pure and undefiled religion. And that same standard must be met by us in our day, in our generation. We are called into a pure and undefiled religion. And I'd like for you to turn with me to James chapter 1, verses 26 and 27. James chapter 1, verses 26 through 27. And we're going to this text because in the letter of James, he's instructing these early Christians on how to live according to the standard raised by Christ. He is challenging the authenticity of their faith. Do you really have a genuine faith in Jesus? If you do, then these are the qualities that should mark your life. And that is what James is unfolding through this letter. True faith rises to meet Christ's standard. So James chapter 1, verses 26 through 27. And we're going to hear from James his definition of pure and undefiled religion. This is what it says. If anyone thinks he is religious and does not bridle his tongue but deceives his heart, this person's religion is worthless. Religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this: to visit orphans and widows in their affliction, and to keep oneself unstained from the world. So you have two appraisals happening in this text. The first, James mentioned, is about how we think of ourselves. And then the second appraisal in the passage is what God's perspective is on what is pure and undefiled religion. So it's how we might perceive our own religiosity, and then God's perspective of what genuine, pure, and undefiled religion actually is. This is an important verse. You know that I often encourage you to circle or underline or bracket things in your text, and so I would like for you to do that with this set of verses, to put a bracket around them, because what is going to unfold mostly for the remainder of the letter are further explanations or further exposition of these three actions that are a demonstration or examples of pure and undefiled religion. James is going to summarize them, and then later in the letter, he's going to fully develop them. This is what Doug Moo, academic commentator, says about this set of verses and its importance in the context of James. These three manifestations of obedience to the word introduce or touch the key ideas that James will return to again in the letter. Controlling the tongue, concern for the helpless, avoidance of worldliness. And you can see the passages outlined there of when these themes come back into focus in the letter. And the idea of these verses, Moo continues, that true religion is manifested in a lifestyle of obedience to God becomes the dominant theme of the next 4 chapters. To some extent, then, these verses set the agenda for the rest of the letter. So this is why these 2 verses are so central to understand what is the book of James all about. And again, it is about what true faith actually is, what it looks like, and how it's expressed in our lives. As we've been walking through this first chapter of James, we've been at it for a number of weeks now, and we're just now in chapter 1. Stay tuned. We're going to cover 13 verses in one message next Sunday. It's going to blow your mind. And I've tasked that to John Hattenberger. I feel like he's going to do a great job with that. But we've been looking at a variety of problems we face as Christ followers. James has been identifying these problems not only for himself and these early Christians, but they are problems for us today. And we had self-deception and self-justification in these last couple of weeks of that's our problem. And we kind of go back into this whole idea of the problem of self-deception again, because our problem is that we can think our religion is more faithful than it is. So we can give an appraisal of ourselves that we are not that bad or that we're pretty good Christians. But that's a problem when we think of ourselves and our religion as more faithful than it actually is. James has already talked about the image of a mirror that gives a reflection, and he said that for those who are self-deceived, they can look intently at the mirror and what they look like and then walk away and then forget. Self-righteousness has been a trap for believers from the beginning. It's easy to drift into this mindset where you move away from grace and you move away from obedience out of a heart of love for God into a sense of duty, which then ends up in comparison. So when you move away from love and grace as your motivation and you move into a sense of just, I'm gonna do what I do, then you start feeling good about what you do and you start taking stock about how others aren't quite doing what you're doing or how you might do it. And then there's this dangerous appraisal going on. And it's a trap for any one of us. And I think it is our problem. We can think our religion is more faithful than it is. And we need a continual reset about the mind of God, about who we are and how we relate to Him and how we relate to the world around us. And the moment that we drift out of love and grace as our primary motivations and we move into a sense of duty, we'll drift into hard-heartedness. We'll drift into a starting point of criticism and suspicion. I don't want to be a critical man. There's outcomes that I definitely want to avoid. But if I'm going to avoid the outcome where I am feeling really good about my level of Christianity as compared to my appraisal of those around me, it's going to drive me to the very outcomes I don't want. So that's our problem. And I think the solution that James continues to uphold for us is this, that Christ sets the standard of our religion. That should be a no-brainer, right? This is like the biggest no-duh, Dave, about this text or about what's true. Jesus sets the standard for our lives and for what we are supposed to reflect. We're not supposed to reflect ourselves. We're supposed to look like Him. We're supposed to sound like Him. We're supposed to demonstrate Him. And we're supposed to honor Him, whether we're in private or we're in public. He sets the standard for our religion. So our way out of a critical heart, a comparative heart, a dutiful heart is a reorientation to Jesus Himself and the standard that He sets for us. That's the solution. And so what is unfolded in these two verses is really a how we can demonstrate pure and undefiled religion. And so we're going to look at what pure and undefiled religion is when we follow obediently in these three areas, these three categories. So our religion is pure and undefiled when we control our speech. James is going to have much more to say about this, and we've already talked about it a little bit earlier in chapter 1, where we were called to be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. Yes. And so he's returning to this theme about how we use our words and that our religion is pure and undefiled when we control our speech. Now, I do want to say this because when we see this word religion as used by James, typically amongst Christians, religion, is it a good word or a bad word? Bad, because we compare the meaning of religion with this legalism, right? That religion in our culture, at least Christian culture, is often paired with this idea of legalism. We're not about a religion, we're about that's exactly right. And so that is not how James is using this term. In fact, this is a very rare term used in the New Testament, mostly only used by James himself. And he's talking about the fact that Christianity is a religion. It is a religion. And he's certainly not adapting a 21st century Christian mindset that religion equals legalism. But he is saying that this word, which often has a meaning of to fear the Lord, he's saying that this is exactly what we are a part of as the church. We do have religion. But it is not a religion based off of human effort for righteousness. It is a religion based off of the righteousness of Jesus Christ, which has been extended to us that we might walk in Him, that we might walk like Him, look like Him, reflect Him. So, in this context, the word religion is a very positive thing in how he's using it. So, pure and undefiled religion, this can be demonstrated when we control our speech. That's all it takes. And I know some of you woke up and it was just, you were like, I guess this is Throat Punch Sunday. That's just how I feel. People just better watch it. I didn't sleep well. You're gonna get it. James says, if anyone thinks he is religious and does not bridle his tongue, but deceives his heart, this person's religion is worthless. So obviously he's using very vivid imagery about the bridle in a in a horse's mouth or a mule or some animal that's being controlled by the bridle. My very first experience was on a horse named Tryan. We were on a family vacation, and I was much smaller than the horse, and was a young boy and was put on, I think, the world's oldest horse. Tryan was really trying, and she made it. She probably did not make it much longer than the ride that I was on, but she did well. And they put me on the saddle of Tryan and gave me the reins. And I could not have been much more than 6 or 7 years old. And I certainly was not put on my Uncle Danny's horse, whose name was Rebel. A Rebel was a huge horse, a strong horse. And my horse she tried. It was in the name. It was in the name. But the horse was under control. By that point in its life, it knew how to function and how to follow with the bit in its mouth. And I wasn't the one at 6 or 7 years old, steering the ship, so to speak. We understand what a bridle is. So the text says, if anyone gives a self-appraisal of the veracity, the true nature of their religion, and it's not reflected here, then we're self-deceived. And James is going to have a lot more to say about our tongue and how we use our speech. And so for today, it's enough to say, your speech and my speech is to rise to the standard of Jesus. Your speech and my speech should be countercultural in the way that Boaz was countercultural in a time when everyone did what was right in their own eyes, and everyone said what they wanted to say, regardless of the consequences. Do we live in an age like that? Of course we do. You guys have heard me say it over and over, especially with social media. It has opened up this megaphone of communication with no accountability. And it's become expected to say whatever you feel without any consequence whatsoever, except for maybe someone to unfollow you or unfriend you, right? You've heard me talk about this. But the standard that Christ has set is that our speech would honor our Heavenly Father. We would sound like Him in the things that we say. But if you did wake up and it was Throat Punch Sunday, it's because of what Jesus says in Matthew 12, 34 and 35. He's challenging his religious, legalistic opponents. There I'm using the word religion in the way we most normally understand it, in terms of a legalistic mindset. He challenged his opponents by calling them a brood of vipers. He said, "You brood of vipers, how can you speak good when you are evil? For out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. The good person out of his good treasure brings forth good, and the evil person out of his evil treasure brings forth evil." We know this is true, that out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. What we carry within us, it's going to come out. And I'm the chief of speaking out what I carry. It's just what's supposed to overflow out of the heart of a Christian is the love and grace of Christ. Much like we see in the scriptures in the book of Ruth of a man who's like, "The Lord bless you." And they said, "And also you." So, a question that is for you to answer is this: is there someone I need to apologize to for my words? we will see in the book of James that the tongue is like a fire, and we can scorch the earth with the things that we say or in the manner in which we say it. So, church, is there someone you need to apologize to for what you said? This whole book is about hearing the word of God and doing what it says. So your assignment is to apologize to someone that you've scorched their earth with what you said or with how you've said it. This is a demonstration of pure and undefiled religion. Secondly, our religion is pure and undefiled when we care for the vulnerable. Is this not pictured so beautifully by the story of Boaz and Ruth? I mean, that is the essence of this incredible 4-chapter book in the Old Testament of a man who was righteous, taking notice of someone who could not help him back. In fact, for him to enter into her world was to take her on as a liability. And yet he willfully, sacrificially stepped down and cared for her in her vulnerable state. And not only her, but also her elderly mother-in-law. It stands out as a beautiful picture of what we're to be. And James, the first part of verse 27 says, religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this, to visit orphans and widows in their affliction. So James is calling out two categories that represent a range. And in essence, he's saying there are vulnerable people in our world who need oversight. That's the idea of this word of visit. It's the same root as the word for elder or overseer, episkopos. This isn't some passing acknowledgement of, I hope you're doing well today, God bless you. That's not oversight. That's not checking on and returning to check on again. That's not ascertaining what are your physical needs, what are your emotional needs, and then seeking to meet those. That is the standard for caring for the vulnerable. And this is an idiom to say, everybody. Specifically, orphans and widows. This is what is pure and undefiled before God, James says. So here we have God's appraisal. So it's a controlled tongue, and it's care for those who cannot meet a quid pro quo standard. Let's look back at the book of Ruth in chapter 2. When Ruth rose to glean, Boaz instructed his young men, saying, let her glean even among the sheaves, and do not reproach her. And also pull out some from the bundles for her, and leave it for her to glean, and do not rebuke her. And here he's going above and beyond what even was the standard of kindness for caring for the poor. It was common for the poor to be allowed to come and glean amongst the fields after they had already been gleaned, and they would get what was left over. And here, Boaz, out of a care for this vulnerable woman, he instructs his workers to limit what they would take. You see, so that she might have more. Have you ever thought about that? This wasn't just grain that was coming all to Boaz, so he just had this just buckets of grain. This was shared by the community, and the people who are working and collecting and gathering, he's asking them, he's telling them, you are going to sacrifice on the behalf of this vulnerable person. I am making that sacrifice, and our community is going to make a sacrifice to care and to meet a need. That is countercultural. And she was in no position to pay him back or provide some kind of, again, quid pro quo response. It's a beautiful picture of what it's to be for us. MacArthur says this: true Christianity is manifested from a pure and loving heart by the way believers talk and by the way they act. It is manifested by how they love and care for those who are in need, not by how they love and care for those they prefer, those who are close to them, or those with whom they share common traits and interests. Love is to be the central and most visible manifestation of salvation. So true Christianity manifests itself through our lives, through our actions, the way we control our speech, and the way that we care for the vulnerable. But I found his words kind of cutting. It's not about those we prefer to help. It's about those who are in need. So, just as you've wondered, who do I need to apologize to for my use of words? The question that I would ask for you with this is, who will you intentionally check on this week? Who will you check on this week? Do you know someone vulnerable? Do you know someone whose life is kind of crushing them right now? Do you know a widow? Do you know an orphan? Do you have an answer for this question? Who will I intentionally check on this week? So we're building kind of a list of tasks. Got to apologize to someone, and I got to check in on someone. It should be kind of getting in here a little bit for us. Because there's always someone to apologize to, because we hurt people with our words. There's always someone to check on, because our world is full of hurting and broken people. They're in our families, they're in our neighborhoods, they're in our workplaces, they're in our church, they're in our communities. Who will I intentionally check on this week? Our religion is pure and undefiled when we control our speech, care for the vulnerable, and pursue holiness. Pursue holiness. This is the second half of verse 27. So religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this: to keep oneself unstained from the world. To keep oneself unstained from the world. If we consider the character of the man with whom we began this whole time together, Boaz, if we consider his character, I think we would agree to say that he was not stained by the world. The book of Ruth is so intricately written. Every individual's name has meaning. The structure of the book itself is designed in order to bring us in each chapter to a focal point of meaning. I won't go into all of that structure, but it is beautifully constructed, beautifully written. But there is only one person who doesn't get a name in the book of Ruth. Do you know who that one is? It's the man who was the closer redeemer to take care of Ruth. And there's a literal Hebrew idiom that means so-and-so. Whose is what's it? That is the real idiom that the Hebrew word is there for. So it's highlighted in the book itself that the person who doesn't get the name is the person who will not stain himself with the problem that it is to help a vulnerable woman and her mother-in-law. And the irony of that is he's stained by his own selfishness, his own self-righteousness, his own fear of, oh, what will the cost be to me? Oh, oy vey, it's too great. And the author of Ruth is highlighting the difference between the one who is supposed to act like a man and the one who actually does. Boaz walked in a separateness from the culture. He lived separately. He was set apart. That's what the whole idea of holiness is. Yes, we are to meet as high of a perfection standard as we can attain. We are to strive for a holy, righteous life. And we are to walk in a spirit of confession when we don't meet the standard of Jesus. But the call of holiness is to be separate from the way the world works and to be set apart to the life that Jesus has called us into. Peter reinforces this when he wrote in 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 14 through 16. He says, as obedient children, do not be conformed to the passions of your former ignorance, but as he who called you is holy, you also be holy in all your conduct, since it is written, you shall be holy, for I am holy. You knew this when you walked in. You knew that the standard that Jesus sets for us is to look like him and to live set apart from the way of the world and to not be stained by the filthy pursuit of self that's all around us. You knew that. And yet you and I struggle and succumb to temptations. It's part of our navigating this life of faith while still dealing with a sinful nature. It's there every day for you and me. And so just as there have been questions of who needs an apology, who needs an intentional check-in, the question for us is, what temptations do I need to take more seriously? I talked about we can slip into a sense of dutifulness and comparison and a critical spirit. One of the things that moves us into that is just unchecked sin. Is there anything that you have categorized or rationalized as, quote unquote, not that bad? But when those sins are there and they go unaddressed and unchecked and unconfessed, it is hardening our heart. We are becoming more and more closed off from thinking about God, desiring to spend time with God, hearing from God. So what temptations do you need to take more seriously in your life? So we add this to our task list. We got some apologizing to do for our words. We've got some vulnerable people to check on this week. And then we have some apologizing to do with the Lord. Where are you giving yourself a pass? I want all of us to move out of this kind of place of drift that we can all end up in and to be warmed and strengthened by the love and grace that's offered in Jesus. And the pathway through that is not more effort from you and me. You're not muscling your way. It's surrender, it's confession, it's humility. That's the way back into a soft-heartedness towards the Lord and for the things of God. So if we could sum up this life we're called into. It's this: our faith is pure and undefiled when godly love overflows through our speech, our care, and our holy pursuit of Jesus. Is this not modeled by the man Boaz? Is this not made perfect and complete in Christ Jesus? I want you and for me to have the kind of demeanor that when people see us, they expect something good and encouraging to come out of our mouths. Something uplifting and connected to the person. I want to be like that. Don't you want to be like that? This is exactly what the Lord will release in us when it is godly love overflowing out of our heart for Him. I had a great boss in college. His name was John DeSteiger. And John DeSteiger, he led the foundation for the university. And so you really want someone who can be winsome, who runs a foundation, because he's after people's money, right? That's what a foundation director does. But you can tell, man, you can sniff out when someone is inauthentic. And it doesn't smell good at all when you get the sense that this person is a schmooze. But as an 18 to 21-year-old, I had an example of a man who was one of the most authentically kind, especially with his words, men. And he did it because he loved Jesus. He ended up as president of Oklahoma Christian University to this day, influencing students and faculty and staff, because what overflows from him is a genuine love for Christ. And he's not wanting something in return. He's a good example. It's the kind of example I want to be. And I know it's the kind of example that we want to set, but our avenue into that is through Christ himself.